You're tuned to WPPM LP Philadelphia 106.5 FM, PhillyCam Community Radio, and PhillyCam TV, also streaming live to Facebook. Thank you for tuning in to Reimagine, a partnership between Reclaim Philadelphia and PhillyCam.
Hey everyone, welcome to Reimagine, a monthly hour-long show hosted by Reclaim Philadelphia and PhillyCam, bringing together leaders to discuss how policy impacts lived experiences of working-class Black and Brown communities and how we hope to imagine better futures together and offer steps for real social transformation.
This month, we are talking about Electoral Power, the most grassroots office in Philadelphia, from protest to politics. We'll cover the Housing Trust Fund ballot question from yesterday's election with Nancy Salandra, a member of the steering committee for the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities. And we also have the chance to speak with author, feminist activist, and assistant committee person Karen Bojar on their Green Shoots for Democracy book.
And we're also going to dive into all there is to know on Philadelphia wards, with 48th Ward Leader Anton Moore and community organizer Steve Paul. And I'm also going to share some of the historical roots of organizing around the ward structure. So stay tuned for this episode of Reimagine.
So we just had a big election yesterday, and something that doesn't get as much attention as the candidates running on the ballot are the questions that we also vote on. One of the questions comes from legislation introduced by Councilmember Derek Green around funding for housing. Nancy Salandra is also a steering committee member for the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities, who is joining us today for more. Nancy, thank you so much for joining our program.
Thank you for having me here. Appreciate it.
Yes, of course. First off, it looks like many voters will approve this ballot question. How do you and the coalition feel about these results?
We're ecstatic because we were really concerned about the ballot question, since there had been out in the paper that they should vote no for it. And for the Housing Trust Fund, the most money we get in is around $12 million a year. And this charter change would bring in another 24 to 26 million a year, which we desperately need, since we have one of the lowest housing trust funds in the country, have one of the highest poverty rates, and also have one of the largest disabled community in the country. Housing for us, and it is in the city, a number one issue. So we're really thrilled that that this passed. So it's really important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And you kind of talked about this a little bit further, but what do you think this ballot question would do in terms of like those tangible results?
Well, the Housing Trust Fund, gives money to basic system repair. This has been happening since 2006. The adaptive modification program in the city, increasing rental production, increasing home ownership, homelessness prevention, also shallow rent subsidies, heater hotline, targeted preservation. So it does so much and is so important. And half of the money goes for people below 30% of AMI, and then half goes above. So for us who work with really poor people, I work in the disability community, it's hugely important. And for our other members that work with people in the poor community, we just could not be happier, because we've tried for so long to constantly improve resources for the Housing Trust Fund. So this is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And being part of the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities, why did y'all come out in support of this ballot question?
Derek Green has been a champion over the last couple of years for us. And so this question came up because we were supposed to be getting money from the general fund after there was negotiations on the construction impact tax that happened in 2019 or 2018 that didn't pass. So we were supposed to get for the next 5 years around $25 million. And we had a fight to get that last year. And then this year, we did not get it. The Kenney administration did not give it to us. So this Derek Green then worked with us to come up with this question so that we wouldn't have to fight each year. And now we would actually get, so the city of Philadelphia doesn't put one dime of their own money into housing. It all depends on federal dollars. So it's so important that the city actually is going to put their money into housing to solve this huge problem that has been going on for decades.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we kind of talked about this before at the top of the segment that there isn't a lot of coverage that gets on this. And, part of that is, within our mainstream media and also, journalists and articles that are written about this. And we actually found that the Philadelphia Inquirer came out against this ballot question. What do you think they're missing in this decision?
We were really stunned. What they said was they wanted future councils and future mayors to have flexibility with the general fund, which didn't make any sense to us. So we really don't know why, and we're kind of appalled by that because they seemed in other ways to understand some stuff about housing, but I don't really think they understand a lot when it comes to really dealing with this issue with people that have no alternatives, that are poor. Like I said, I work in the disability community, and we try to take people out of nursing homes, and housing is a number one issue why people can't get out because it's such a problem. But it's so unaffordable in this city. You have to make over $24 an hour to afford, regular housing, and that's not going to happen. So we work with a lot of people that are on fixed incomes. So it's becoming a big issue. I mean, one of the fastest homeless populations is becoming seniors. So, I mean, it's just outrageous that this city is really not addressing the issues. But now with this, it'll help out a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we go towards the last question, I want to ask, what's next for your coalition and the fight for housing justice in Philadelphia?
So we're working on land justice campaign, and that's to amend the land bank to allow for the small developers to get community land trust and then be able to get land from the city at nominal fee so that it doesn't just go to the big developers in order to develop more affordable housing and urban ag. So we're also part of that so that we get more of the land than just the big developers. So that's what our next plan is.
Wow. Awesome. That sounds really exciting. And definitely just want to thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with us.
Well, thank you again for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course.
Awesome. I'm really excited that this ballot question passed. I was, I was very worried when I saw the Inquirer come out against it. But I'm excited now to move on to our next guest. So election day, as we know, passed, but we are just a few months away from the 2022 primaries, where we'll be voting for a new Pennsylvania governor and a new U.S. senator. But an often ignored but important race in the next year primary involves committee people who hold immense power when it comes to local elections. So to help us learn more about these races, we're going to be talking to feminist activist, assistant committee person, and author Karen Bojar, who literally wrote the book on committee people. So thanks for joining us on our program today, Karen.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. What got you activated when it came to politics?
Well, I've been a political activist all my adult life, but I became a committee person in 1986. Ronald Reagan had been reelected, and there was a powerful right-wing backlash against some of the gains of the 60s and 70s. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? What kind of history is repeating itself? Anyway, in 1986, I became a Democratic committee person. I wasn't sure what I was getting into, but I had lost faith in fundamental social change. I remember at some point in the late 80s, I did not renew my GSA membership, and I thought, I'm never going to see a powerful socialist movement in this country in my lifetime. The best I can do is help to elect liberal Democrats. And so that's what I did. And that's what I thought until 2016 when Bernie came around. And I began to think, well, maybe it is possible. Before then, I saw working in the Democratic Party and working for fundamental change as two totally different paths. And I began to see, as a result of Bernie's campaign, that they did intersect and that you could work for that long-term goal by building a progressive base within the Democratic Party. So that's why I became a committee person. I also, the fact that I became one in 1986 has to do with the fact that a neighbor knocked on my door and said, hey, there's an opening. Why don't you step in? And so I did. And I was very lucky that I landed in one of the most liberal wards in the city, the 9th Ward in Chestnut Hill and Mount Airy. If I had landed in any other ward, I don't think I would have lasted 30 days, let alone 30 years as I did. The 9th is a ward where committee people have power, they can vote, there's transparency in ward finances. And it was a very smooth ride for me. But I soon began to realize that the 9th Ward is not typical in Philadelphia politics. And that's when I began to look around and to think about what could be done to try to make the Democratic Party more democratic throughout the city.
So what have been the rewards or challenges for you as a committee person in your 30 years serving as one?
Well, in the 9th Ward, there really haven't been many challenges because committee people are empowered. Mm-hmm. And I was, with maybe a few exceptions here and there, I was very happy with the way the ward was run. So in the 9th Ward, there were no major challenges. Trying to make the entire city more democratic is really, really difficult. And I noticed, though, in 2014, something was beginning to happen. I saw the green shoots of democracy that I wrote about in the book were beginning to stir. And that was really why one of the reasons I wrote the book, to document what was happening. And I remember when I was writing it, I thought, I might look really ridiculous in a couple of years because these green shoots just might not flourish. However, young people in Philadelphia proved me right, and they began to develop beachheads in more and more wards. And actually, in 2018, they took over 3 wards, the 1st and 2nd in South Philly and the 48th in West Philly.
Yeah,
it's only 3 out of 69, however.
I mean, that's a big impact, though. And I want to just name that one of the trainings I took on committee people, like you were one of the people leading it. So I was definitely inspired to run based on you stepping up and talking about these things. Mm-hmm. And then after I became committee person, I definitely read your book to learn more because I wasn't being taught a lot about it from the folks that were in power where I live. Mm-hmm. In your book, you talk about there being open wards, closed wards, and you also name some that are kind of hybrids. Right. Can you kind of explain to our viewers what the difference is between these kinds of wards?
Well, in a nutshell, an open ward is a ward in which committee people vote on endorsements, in which there's transparency about ward finances, in which the ward leader will invite candidates not endorsed by city committee to address the ward. So the committee people have the opportunity to meet a wide range of candidates before they vote. Now, there are 66 wards. 3 of them are divided into 2 parts, A and B, mm-hmm. which leads to the kind of anomalous situation. We have 66 wards, but 69 ward leaders. Yeah. For all practical purposes, we have 69 wards. And before the recent election in 2018, only 5 of them were open independent wards. They became so in the 1960s. A lot of the energy from the civil rights movement, anti-war movement, began to spill over into the ward structure as people who had been involved in those movements began to bring their perspective toward politics. And then there was the Black empowerment movement, which had a powerful impact on Philadelphia politics. However, the number of open wards remained frozen until 1998. Well, actually, before 1998, there were 4 of them: the 5th, the 9th, the 8th, and the 27th. In 1998, Terry Gillen managed a kind of miracle when she took over the 30th ward. However, since 1998, there have not been any more open wards, and that's a long period of time for that structure to be frozen in place. But it was until 2018, when 3 more wards joined the ranks of open wards, bringing the total to, depending on how you count, 8 or 9 open wards. There are some wards it's some question as to how open they are.
Yeah.
But I mean, you get the picture. There still are many wards which are not. However, when I went around interviewing committee people and ward leaders, I did find that even in wards that were closed, there was some possibility for democratic discussion and debate. And in more and more wards, there are open ward caucuses which are being formed. And my hope is that in the next committee person elections, we will have more progressive committee people elected, and these caucuses will begin to grow. And although I have tended to focus on trying to recruit progressives, feminist activists, I also think it's important just to have ordinary, decent citizens who care about democracy. They may not be self-identified progressives or socialists, but they do care about serving their neighbors, and they do value democratic processes. So we need to get them as well, because the reality is there are not enough self-identified progressive socialists to reform the Democratic Party, and we need to build alliances.
And we also need people to do the work end of the day. We need folks to get out the vote. So like you might be a socialist, but if you're not knocking doors, like you're not doing much good for us. But I appreciate all the knowledge you brought for us. I do have one last question. I know that you have, since leading as a committee person, you have stepped aside. You're now an assistant committee person.
We call it associate.
Oh, so associate, sorry. And what led you to step down, and why do you think that there should be new leadership to end this segment?
Well, I had been a committee person for 32 years. That's a long time. And that's one of the problems in the Democratic Party. A lot of people hang on to these positions forever. And so there are no opportunities for new blood, for young people to have this opportunity to learn about the political process. And I really thought I had to do it. And there happened to be a young woman in my neighborhood, Katie Davenport, who was interested in doing it. So why should I hang on to it when she was available? And she's turned out to be wonderful. And although I'm sure there are some older committee people who are energetic, I see a real difference with the younger ones. We had a new committee person in one of the wards that's at my polling place. And I was at the ward. I fill in for a few hours of election day to help out the current committee people. And this brand new committee person, she was running up and down, greeting every voter, talking to everyone. I could tell it was something new and exciting to her. And I don't think that many of us older committee people have that kind of enthusiasm. We may have the commitment, but not the energy and enthusiasm. And younger people bring new ideas, which we desperately need. They are our future. And I think that is the great hope. A lot of people don't realize that many people in the committee structure around the city are in their 70s, 80s, even 90s, believe it or not. And for some reason, they just don't want to give it up. You see that in community organizations as well.
Yeah. I mean, there is like a long held, like, people want to hold on to power for as long as
even if it's a tiny little bit of power.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking about this and help. And your book has been like really foundational for me, like learning more about my own ward. Like you described a rump caucus existing in the ward. And so I hope to see those rump caucuses grow. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And now we're gonna talk. Talk to one of the new young leaders in the ward structure. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Conversations, interviews, and information bringing together community resources and leaders to discuss how policy impacts lived experiences of working-class Black and Brown communities, and to imagine better futures together and offer real steps for social transformation.
All right. So one of the changes since the last election and since our last guest book came out was the democratization of the 48th ward for the Democratic Party, officially making it one of the few open wards in the city. On our program today, we are joined by the 48th ward leader, Anton Moore. Thank you so much for joining us, Anton.
I'm sorry. I was on mute. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, beautiful day.
Yes, absolutely. And kind of just want to dive right in. So what are the issues you care about that motivated you to run for a committee person?
Gun violence, public safety, housing, and just lack of opportunities in the neighborhood. It's frustrating. You look across the board and you see, just last night, 2 blocks away from me, I heard some bullets and a house was shot up where someone tried to rob a family. So being at the table to be able to get things done in the neighborhood to bring about change was one of the things that pushed me to want to, get involved.
Yeah, and that's very real. And as I mentioned, your ward became open after your election to ward leader. What, in your view, is an open ward, and why was democratizing your ward important?
I think what's important is giving people a say-so. You know what I mean? You can't ask your committee people, we want you to do X, Y, Z, but not give them a voice on who the different candidates like. Sometimes you get like a lot of the older people who want to, voice their opinion. And sometimes we have to learn to be quiet and listen to them. And that's what I've learned to do, just listen. And I get guidance from a lot of my elder committee people that's in the ward because it helps you out. You know what I mean? None of us know it all. So it's good to have people that give you wisdom to also listen, but think for yourself, but also take that wisdom in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the openness and the dialogue and that feedback is really, really necessary. Your ward is one of the few that has an active social media presence and website presence. On your website, you're quoted as saying you want to make the 48th ward a power ward. What is a power ward in your view?
Not so much a power ward, but a ward that takes care of the people, takes care of the committee people, the neighborhoods. We do food drives. We do, job initiatives, trying to get people hired. We try to help the neighborhood when it comes to public safety and gun violence and stuff like that. So when we say power ward, we mean an engaged ward that know what's going on, that's talking to people, but also, at the pulse of the community.
Absolutely. And at the age of 35, you are the youngest elected ward leader in the city. Only 11 of the 69 ward leaders are under the age of 50, which is wild in my opinion. But what's it like being the youngest city committee and ward leaders of color in their meetings?
It's tough, you know what I mean? Because you try to navigate through, everything that's going on and, give your input, but also to do your own thing, to bring about change in the neighborhood. So, it's not easy. Even yesterday with the election yesterday, it was where I actually got sick later on in the day, helping, the poll workers out, helping them fill some slots, feeding the poll workers. It was a tough day yesterday.
Yeah, no, I definitely imagine with the weather and the elements, there was a lot of factors into it. So I really appreciate all the work that y'all done. A shout out to all the poll workers that got up super early because it's definitely not easy. The 48th ward also has one of the youngest ward treasurers in the city, having elected Shania Davidson, age 18, as the last ward reorganization meeting. These positions, like ward leader, are usually held by elders that we kind of talked about before, early on in the program. And what made your ward embrace youth in leadership?
Oh, you have to. We have to understand that we're not going to be here forever. Even with me being 35, I want to see younger people get involved. I don't want this position forever. You know what I mean? You want to get young people involved. And Shania is our secretary. She's our secretary. She's the youngest secretary and elected committee person in the city of Philadelphia. But it's all about, embracing the youth, embracing the future. Because I feel like the day that you take the helm of your position, you need to be looking for your successor so that when you move on, you can have somebody right there, young, with a lot of energy to fill that position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I usually find that open wards are more engaged with the community. Could you be able to tell me more about your Walks with Ward 48 campaigns and why events like these are important?
Oh, the Walk with 48 initiative is something to give the community the opportunity to talk to the elected officials, talk to their ward leaders, see what's going on, what are the pressing issues. Because here's the thing. It's easy to tell somebody, we want you to vote, but they're going through hell. You want to be able to connect with them on a grassroots level and then say, hey, we can actually deal with this issue. This is what we can do, to combat that. But also, look, can you vote as well? So I think, asking someone to vote, but also addressing issues in the community, they go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you kind of touched upon this a little bit earlier, but I also wanted to get any more of your reactions or feelings after yesterday's election.
Yesterday was brutal because you had a lot of people that called out that didn't show up. So we were calling neighbors like, look, can you help out? Can you help out? And then even for the poll workers, sitting there all day, a lot of them don't have a lot of money. You know what I mean? So we, in my ward, we feed our poll work. I mean, our the inside workers and the outside workers. So we gave them breakfast and lunch yesterday, dropping it off, making sure they're fine, because you want to make sure that they feel appreciated as well, because you can't pay them enough to sit there for 12, 14 hours and just not eat or anything like that. So with the weather being nasty, I was knocking on some doors myself. You know what I mean? That's why I think I got sick at. But doing all that, it's tough. It's not easy at all. You give a lot of yourself doing this work. And you take a lot from yourself because it's a commitment. You know what I mean? It's a time commitment, but also too is a personal commitment as well. And it's a commitment to democracy. It's a commitment to wanting to see better in your neighborhoods and wanting to be at the pulse of what's going on in the community.
Absolutely. And taking that vision into the tangible reality and really bringing it towards like those next steps for sure. And, as we kind of wrap up, we're looking at like the Senate and gubernatorial elections next year. What do you think needs to change to increase voter turnout in future elections?
Look, you have to start addressing the needs of the people. If you look what happened last night around the country, looking at Virginia and even looking at New Jersey, I mean, if we don't get it together and get on message and get some stuff done, you're going to see the repeat of what you was able to see yesterday. You're going to see it the next general election, the Republicans taking over Democratic seats. So I think we have to understand and have a spirit of compromise and realize that in this life, we're not going to get everything we want. But we had to put our best foot forward and try to work together, to make a difference in neighborhoods, because it's rough. And you can see, like I said from last night, we got to do much more. We got to do better.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is a really great sum up to our next guest. And I really just want to thank you so much for taking the time and energy yesterday, because it was not easy. And I do hope you are feeling better, because we're still in a pandemic, so we got to take care of ourselves. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anton. And we're actually going to be moving on towards 101 with Sergio and Steve Paul. So take it away.
Thanks, Demo. Yeah, I'm excited that we're spending so much time talking about these important seats that don't get as much attention as they deserve. Part of what's made it difficult to get people excited about these races is that most voters either don't know who their committee people are or what they even do. And there's a lot of confusion overall when it comes to the local structure of political parties. So to help walk us through the basics or Wards 101, we have local community organizer Steve Paul, who ran for committee person in the 17th Ward in the last ward elections. And I swear I see Steve everywhere, and he has served as political director, steering committee, or board member for several progressive organizations in our city. Thank you, Steve, for joining us on our program today. Oh, you might be muted, Steve.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks. And so, yeah, let's dive right in. Like, we talk a lot about wards. We talk about ward leader. What are wards for folks watching the program?
Sure. So basically, I mean, a lot of folks know, like, running elections and could be super complicated. Our democracy is a huge system. So in order to like make sure like our elections are really coordinated in a like coherent way and everything runs smoothly, the city of Philadelphia is divided into 66 sort of geographic areas, and that's what we call wards. And so, like I live in Germantown, so I live in a 12th ward. I used to live in a 17th ward. So these 66 wards are basically just the city of Philadelphia being broken down into these smaller units so we can actually run our elections and keep track of everything. And so each of these 66 wards have a certain number of divisions, what we call voting districts. And there are about 1,703 divisions, to be specific, in the city of Philadelphia within those 66 wards. So you have 66 wards, and then each of those wards have a certain number of voting districts or divisions. And so, for example, I live in a 12th ward, division 20, which essentially tells you where you go vote, essentially.
Yeah, and so just looking at those divisions, these are like really, really small. They're like a few blocks. So this really is like a really I would say the most grassroots level of elected office that we have in the city. So can you tell us a little bit more about like what are committee people and what they do?
Yeah, so both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are, like you said, are really organized in such a way where like the political power of both parties really start at the neighborhood and a local level. That power starts at the grassroots level of the committee people, right? Like those are the people that really have the power in both parties. So each of the divisions that I just mentioned earlier, the 1,700 divisions, theoretically elect 2 committee people every 4 years. And I say theoretically because sometimes nobody runs for these seats, unfortunately. Sometimes they stay vacant for years without being filled, which is really unfortunate. But every 4 years, we elect these neighbors in our division, and they serve 4-year terms. And both the Republican Party, again, and the Democratic Party have 2 committee people for each division. That means there could be 3,000 people in the city of Philadelphia who are elected every 4 years to serve as committee people in all of these divisions and these wards. And we can get into a little bit more too. In addition to like just committee people being elected, then the committee people then themselves, they meet within their wards. So for example, all of the committee people in my 12th ward, after we all elect them, they meet together to then elect a leader amongst themselves, which is called a ward leader.
Yeah, and what are the responsibilities of a committee person typically?
Yeah, so I mean, it could be a really powerful tool of like organizing and mobilizing voters in the city. Committee people are supposed to register new voters whenever they move to their divisions, get out the vote for candidates, help candidates get on the ballot by circulating their petitions. But they can even do even more than that, right? Like outside of the political, just getting educating voters about the candidates, getting candidates on the ballot. Outside of elections, they can also let their neighbors know what's going on in their community, what's going on in city council, at state house, educate their division about the political issues that are going on in this country and in their neighborhood. And, one of the things I did as a committee person also is like, you can actually, as a committee person, you can mobilize your neighborhood for and against a specific policy, right? If you are sick and tired of seeing your rec center not funded, you can organize your community to do something about that. And these divisions are really sometimes really small, right? I'm talking about maybe 200 doors and 600 registered voters in a typical committee division. So you could really use it as a tool of power to, what Anton was talking about, like hold elected officials accountable, making sure they're actually doing the work in our community, and empowering your neighbor and your neighborhood to actually be involved in the political process.
And Karen and Anton talked a little bit about like with the differences between an open ward and a closed ward. A lot of this comes down to the power that ward leaders have in order to make those open and democratic in the first place. What are the other like ways that ward leaders have a lot of power when it comes to who is represented and who everyday voters end up choosing when they get into the polling place?
Yeah, I will. So one thing I want viewers to be clear on is like, I really, in my opinion, think the committee people have a lot of power because they elect the ward leader, right? Like it really starts with the 2 committee people that you elect, because not only do they have all these responsibilities as a committee person, but after their election, they get to choose that ward leader. And that ward leader, to your point, is super powerful, right? And I think Anton talked about this a little bit. They're supposed to make sure all of their divisions have enough polling workers and at the poll to make sure that things are like actually running smoothly on election day. That includes like not just the 2 committee people, but the 5-member election board. They also are, I think Karen mentioned this. They, outside of maybe the 6 to 9 open wards, all of the other wards, the ward leaders actually determine who actually is endorsed by the Democratic Party. So whenever you walk up to the poll and someone hands you a sample ballot and you see these names on there, that was the ward leader's decision on whose name got to be put on that ballot. And that's the super powerful thing when you have thousands of people pushing this specific name for people to vote on. So ward leaders really have a lot of power in terms of like which candidates get elected. They're also supposed to, raise money for the wards to make sure like, things are able to function and the ward has enough money. Candidates all the way from president, governors to city council members, they actually go to ward leaders before they run, right? Like to tell them, hey, I'm running, would love your support. So it's a really powerful position to hold and within both the Democratic and Republican infrastructure.
Yeah, and as you named, a lot of ward leaders end up just supporting who city committee ends up endorsing. Many times we've seen that that's counter to what voters actually want in Philadelphia. And then another thing that I feel like I've seen that's been important from the last election is that we had all of these candidates pop up in the general that weren't in the primary. And that's because the ward leaders essentially got to pick these magic seats and they got to fill these seats. And that's the same thing that happens whenever special elections happen in certain areas. So yeah, there's a lot of power when it comes to these positions. I feel like we have to wrap it up a little bit, but I do want to hear a little bit about what motivated you to run for committee person, and why do you think it's important for more people to be invested in these elections?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always had this passion and understanding about like what power is about, right? Like, because this is really about having the power, right? Like the ability to advocate and change your circumstances in your community and bring resources in your community. And so, I grew up in Northwest Philadelphia. I attended all public schools. At a very early young age, I noticed the difference between my school, Martin Luther King High School, which I had to walk 30 minutes to, versus Central, which I lived right there. Central was like 5 minutes from my house. I noticed the fact that I had to go through a metal detector when I had to go to school. By the time I was in 11th grade, I had police pull out guns on me twice. Like, so all of these systems, underfunded public schools, being over policed, all of these things, like, go back to having the right city council person, the right state house member, the right governor, and all of these things were connected to like the electoral process that, when I found out like, oh man, it starts at the committee person level, I get to choose the ward leader who then gets to choose the leader of the Democratic Party. I was like, sign me up. So, I ran in 2014 just because I knew the next city council and the next mayoral election was coming up, and I wanted to have an impact on that. And, I was in a closed ward, the 17th ward at the time, but I organized the town hall. 250 of my neighbors came out and they got to hear from the candidates, and they supported a candidate at the time that my ward leader did not support, who was an education activist, Councilmember Helen Gim. And to me, that's the kind of power a committee person can have. I took my experiences of going to underfunded schools and really wanted to push someone that I thought shared my value and we would fight for public education, despite, at the time, my ward not wanting to support that person. And so, I encourage anyone, if you care about any issues in your community, to get involved at the grassroots level. Even if you don't win as a committee person, the truth is the conversations at the doors that you have with your neighbors, starting to have these kind of conversations, developing those relationships will definitely build relationships with your neighbors that you can still impact the outcome of the elections. And, like the last thing I say is like, we saw really low turnout yesterday, right? Like we have to do the work. Like we know the way people show up to the polls is by people having conversations at the door, right? And so we need these 3,000 plus seats to be filled with people who are going to be knocking on doors, talking to their neighbors about the issues, not just on an election day, but throughout the year, to get them involved so that when elections do come up, people are, like, they have a stake, they understand their stake for like going out to the polls and electing folks.
Yeah, and I always say it's like we need to work out this voter muscle, and that's what empowered committee people like you can really do to contribute to this, and why I think more folks from the movement should be joining these races, running for office. So thank you so much, Steve, for helping explain a little bit about the structure, and excited to see you run again in next year's election, hopefully. And now we're going to transition and hear more about some historical roots. And first, we're going to play a clip from a former state rep, David Richardson, and to give us a little hint of what it looks like when we move from protest to politics.
On the move. Assalamu alaikum. Free Mumia. Free Mumia. Free Mumia. Free Mumia now. Brothers and sisters, comrades, it's certainly my pleasure to be here. One of your state representatives from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I am ashamed to be a state representative in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania with a chump like Governor Ridge at the helm. I'm ashamed. But I wanted to come here today to let you know that some of us are not afraid. That even though we may be elected, we'll say what's on our mind. But we must understand that we're freedom fighters first, and that all the other things come next. That I'm a black man first, and then a state representative. I don't confuse the two. And I think it's time for us to wake up and realize and understand that you got a lot of us that are willing to go to battle, because the freedom ain't gonna never be free unless we take it. There's too many of us sitting around thinking that it's gonna come to us on some damn silver platter. Wake up, you fools.
The last few years have seen its share of movements taking to the streets, calling for transformational changes when it comes to funding our communities, police accountability, housing justice, and more. But what's next, and how, as a movement, can uplift leaders from protests to politics? My co-host Sergio Saya has been thinking a lot about this as it relates to committee person elections in May. So, Sergio, let's get right into it. How do we move forward?
I'm really excited to talk about this, and I love that clip from State Rep David Richardson, because it kind of like talks about what I think we need to be doing. And I think how we move forward is by looking back at the past wins of the movements that came before us, looking at the civil rights movement, looking at things like the Black Political Forum and other organizations that use these structures to gain political power. And yeah, that's the kind. David Richardson is the kind of politician that I'd like to see today. That kind of fiery person that doesn't look like the suit and combed back hair, and like the person that doesn't look like it's from our community. So these are the kind of folks I'm really hoping to empower by talking about these things to get them to run for office.
Yeah, and you honed in on something really important there in that historical aspect. What are some past wins that you think can also ground us as we look towards the future?
Yeah, I mean, so there, like I mentioned Black Political Forum, which I'll talk a little bit more later, but it kind of started like the big transformational change that happened in Philadelphia involved an organization called Americans for Democratic Action, which is ADA. So for the longest time, Republicans held complete control over the whole structure in Philadelphia, and there weren't a lot of Democrats holding a citywide office. And so one of the first things that happened is that there was a push to have this mayoral candidate, Dilworth, who is a Democrat, run. And part of his campaign was creating this school for practice for practical politics. And what they did is they did things that a lot of us do now. Is they, we encourage people to volunteer, to knock doors on their neighbors, talk to their friends and family about what's at stake in this election. And really, what they did is really create like a whole team, an army of folks that were ready to move folks and make sure that we went from one party rule and switched over to a new way of doing things.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And sort of, we can see that transition over recently with campaigns like hashtag She Can Run and organizations like Emily's List and others. We've seen a push to elect more women. So how do you think women's movements use these campaigns in the past?
Yeah, I also forgot to mention that, so that mayoral campaign that I mentioned, it didn't actually win, but it kind of created enough energy to push the movement forward to future wins. So actually, Richardson did run again, and he ran for city treasurer. And one of his volunteers during the last campaign, Joseph Clark, ran for city controller. And this was the time they actually won and shifted control for the Democrats. But to answer your question, gender plays a huge role when it comes to who holds leadership. We've seen that happen a lot, and we're far from having gender parity. But one of the first times that folks kind of like started to focus on gender when it came to these elections was around the Philadelphia Women's Political Caucus. They launched in 1970 a political education campaign similar to what the ADA did to encourage women specifically to run for office and engage in the ward structure. And so like one of the leaders of this movement was Florence Cohen. And, she had this to say. She said that we have got to think of a new type of woman, an independent woman involved in politics, someone motivated by issues rather than political allegiances and loyalties. Because what she saw at the time is that the few women that were representing them were people just allied to the political parties and not really like standing up for gender justice. But it was at the time when this campaign was happening, only 7 of the 69 Democratic ward leaders were women, and as she said, none of them would be what you would call independent women.
Interesting. And what does the balance look like today when it comes to ward leaders and gender?
So today, like I said, we've got a ways to go, but today it's about 30% of the ward leaders. So that I think there are about 21 women leading wards throughout the city today. So definitely more than before. And I'd say a majority of those women are most likely more independent. But there are some that, are, strongly allied to the party and not standing up for like the independence and of the voters and the candidates that voters are actually supporting today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And what do you think is missing when we talk about gender and leadership in the wards?
Well, I mean, we need to expand like kind of our conversations of gender. And as somebody I'm a committee person in the 46th ward and I'm an out queer committee person, I don't see enough queer representation in general when it comes to these seats. And I don't think there's any historical reference for a trans or non-binary ward leader. I don't think we've ever had that. I'm not even sure as far as queer ward leaders, how that looks like today. And even when it comes to committee person races, we do need to do some more work to get more trans and non-binary folks to run for these seats, so that we can get them to be so that other folks in the community can learn about the struggles and think about like queer liberation in a different way.
Absolutely. And I think you touched upon a really important point when we, talk about movements is often the lack of intersectionality, right? Especially when it comes to gender and even segueing into race. And my follow-up question for that is, how have Black and Brown movements used the ward structure for power in the past?
Yeah, so one of the best examples and something that like I've really been like diving into books about is the Black Political Forum and its impact on the city till now. We have seen how Black leadership, like in Philadelphia, we have a lot of Black leaders, and thankfully that's done because of the work that the Black Political Forum did back in the late 60s. So this organization was founded in 1968 with the purpose of educating Black Philadelphians about what and who to vote for. And the founders include many names that y'all might recognize. So it was Hardy Williams, who was a prominent Black attorney and community activist at the time. It also involved church leader John F. White Sr., and community leader Wilson Good, who later ran and won for mayor.
Oh, wow. And why was the Black Political Forum formed?
So, like I said, it's to educate folks, but the thing that kind of like sparked the curiosity is kind of like the same reason why I think we should be like looking into the historical roots of our wins. Basically, at the time, these leaders were inspired by wins that they had seen in other cities, like Cleveland and Gary, Indiana, where they had elected Black mayors. So that was kind of the goal for this movement, is how do we actually elect a Black mayor? How do we actually elect Black ward leaders, Black city council members, Black state representatives? And they did this for both the Democratic and the Republican Party, because they weren't too sure like who was on their side, and they kind of wanted to see representation wherever they can. But that's kind of like how they got started, is kind of just like trying to run as many races as they can. And they did a lot of this from like a West Philly storefront, where like the other movements I talked about, they trained potential candidates, street campaigners, poll watchers. They did vote registration, and they held after every election. They would hold a seminar to analyze and reflect on the returns of the elections that they ran in, and think about the effectiveness of future campaigns.
And what are the wins connected to the organizing of the Black Political Forum?
So they did so much with the short time that they were doing this. So first of them included, like, one of their leaders, Hardy Williams, was elected as ward leader in 1968, and then later he became state representative in 1970. So already, like, having one of the members of the organization elevated not just to ward leader and then later to state representative power. So building on the wins that they did through the ward structure to actually keep pushing folks forward. In 1971, Robert Nix Jr. was elected to the PA Supreme Court to become the first Black Chief Justice of any of the state's high courts in the country. And then they also helped to elect Dr. Ethel Allen, who is a Republican, to become the first elected Black woman on Philly City Council. So that's a lot of wins that they did. And you know, we started this segment by the amazing clip of David Richardson. So in 1972, the Black Political Forum encouraged David Richardson to run for the state rep seat in the 180th. And he was only 24 at the time. He was an ex-gang member who in 1967 had led a student demonstration at the school district headquarters. And he was urging school administrations to incorporate more Black history into the public school curriculum. And at the time when he was propositioned to run for this role, he wasn't even registered to vote. So, like, I do want to like encourage folks who aren't even engaged in the process right now. Like, you can become engaged at any point, and there's nothing stopping you from becoming a leader if you're building the relationships that you need to have. So yeah, and you know, they had so many successes that they wrapped up basically at the end of 1978, kind of declaring most of their work had been done. And they basically set the stage for one of their own leaders to go on and become Philly's first Black mayor, and that was Mayor Wilson Good.
Wow, so it's a really interesting segue to see. And kind of shifting gears a little bit and talking about the successes for, you know, Black folks and, you know, the Black community. What has Latino electoral power looked like in the city?
So it's not much. Unfortunately, you know, we've only been able to have maybe at most 2 state representatives of Philadelphia from the Latino community. And although there are 5 Latino majority wards in the city, only 3 of them are represented by a Latino ward leader at this moment. And much of that comes from gerrymandered districts. A lot of those wards had been diluted to remove Latino power, essentially, so that Latinos couldn't actually take on leadership. But since then, we've also had we have had consistently at least one Latino council member, but that's for a district seat. I don't think we've ever had a win for Latinos at the city level, aside from one of the justices. I think his name was Angel Ortiz, who became the first Latino judge.
Awesome. And aside from the wins, what are other lessons that we should?
Actually, sorry, I forgot to say. Sorry, I forgot to mention a big thing. So a lot of where we are today is based on the organizing from Puerto Rican and Latino communities back in the day, who looked at what the Black Political Forum was doing, and they got together and said, well, we need to fight for electoral power for the Latino communities next. So it started with basically the Philly Young Lords, which was a socialist organization, was founded in 1970, and many of those leaders from that party went on to create the Puerto Rican Alliance, which was founded in 1979. And like I said, they were inspired by the Black Political Forum, and they were also part of the Multicultural Alliance that helped elect Mayor Wilson Goode, and later elected Angel. So it was Angel Ortiz who was the first Philly council member. But yeah, because of them, that's why we have these folks.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing and dropping all the gems with historical information. I love learning about that. And I hope, folks in the audience do too. And, aside from the wins, what are other lessons we should learn from these movements? And also segueing to what are the next steps and how can people get involved in these committee people races?
Yeah, so I read this book by Mayor Wilson Goode that talks a lot about the Black Political Forum, and there is a quote that I kind of want to name because it's really important for us as we're thinking about how we're revamping and having movements transform the ward structure. This is a warning that Mayor Wilson Goode had about the folks that were involved in the Black Political Forum. So he said, for the most part, however, while these candidates had mastered the process of winning, many of them forgot the greater purpose of why they were running. They went from becoming reformers to ordinary politicians, more concerned about re-election than about reforming bad practices and advocating for the needs of the people. They became those who they had replaced. So when we're trying to think of transforming machine politics when it comes to electoral politics here in the city, I think we need to be thinking about that to ground us so that we don't end up becoming exactly the same things that we're trying to replace.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going into next steps, what can be next for folks and how can folks be involved in these committee people races?
So, I mean, the first step is like having conversations like this and educating people about the importance. So I'm excited that we have spent so much of this time talking about it. I know that my organization, as well as like other organizations throughout the city, are going to be engaging in these next committee person elections and empowering everyday people to run for these important positions. So we do have a sign-up form. It's at bit.ly/2022 wards. And we're encouraging folks to sign up to run for themselves. Like if you're empowered after watching this program, if you want to run, sign up to run. Maybe you're like, maybe it's not for me, but I know exactly that leader in my division. I know that neighbor on the block who's always talking to me about the election and making sure that our neighbors are registered and are informed. Maybe you want to nominate somebody. I really think that it's important for us to start telling other people that they should be leaders, because so many of us think that we don't deserve this or we aren't those leaders. And then the other thing I would encourage folks to do is if you're not ready to run for yourself or you don't have a leader in mind, those leaders exist in our communities. So part of not everyone is going to come to one of these trainings, but a lot of us have relationships or can knock on our neighbors' doors and start to do the work to identify the future leaders. And, we can proposition them and invite them into leadership. And it's really beautiful to have somebody really believe in you and ask you to take this on.
Absolutely. And I know we're cutting short on time, but I definitely just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody who has come on the show, Sergio, I know you worked really, really hard on this episode, and it really means a lot, especially for me, like not really knowing a lot about this. This was definitely a very, informative and really engaging experience, especially going into the historical aspect, because there have been so many stepping stones into realizing like, yeah, we can envision this for the future. Like these are tangible realities sort of like within our grasp already. It's a matter of just like, being able to talk to our neighbors, getting engaged, and being able to stay involved. So I really appreciate that.
And I love the time talk. I'm a committee person, and I've loved being able to talk to my neighbors about this. It only takes 10 signatures from your neighbors to get on the ballot. So it's not that hard. It's an easy way. It's an easy race to win if you have those relationships. And just know that a lot of these are vacant. So a lot of times you don't even have somebody representing you, and that leads to the losses that we see that kind of have us sitting into apathy sometimes.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much again. And I hope everyone has a great day. And if you're interested to know more about Reclaim, you could definitely follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. It is at Reclaim Philadelphia.
Thanks, everyone.